What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over debugging part 2, which is essentially how to use the Visual Studio Code or a compiler to attach to your Unreal process and step through the code as it is playing. Now, in the first episode, we went over debugging and using print strings and UE4 logs, which is good and very useful. It's particularly useful for a quick debugging technique and things like that. But some of your issues will be a bit more complicated, and it will actually be easier to attach your process. I'm going to be using my fighting game tutorial for this. If you're not familiar with my fighting game tutorial, then you can go ahead and click this link to get started if you want to catch up on this series. However, I know you're here for debugging, so it's very possible that you're not interested in that, which is perfectly fine. We won't be covering anything specific done in this tutorial in this episode, but we are going to use it as the base for what we're debugging. So, I could debug a bunch of stuff here. But what we're going to debug today, I think specifically, is just our move right function, just because it's simple, and I think it hits all the points that we want to hit. So, great. Say we want to debug our move right function. We either don't like something about it, or we don't know if the right character state is getting set, because I've seen that issue come up a lot. Let's go ahead and learn how to do that. To get started, I'm actually going to close Unreal, and I'm going to show you the first method here of actually launching Unreal Editor through Visual Studio, making it automatically attached. First thing you're going to want to do is go into your code. I've already set one. I'm going to take it away. We're going to find out where we want to put our breakpoint. Now, a breakpoint is that little red dot you saw. You can click here to the left of the numbers. If you have your numbers disabled, it's on the side panel up against the very last tab. See the tab here all the way on the left? It might be the very first tab, depending on how you look at it. So this tab all the way to the left of your screen, I have my toolbox here, so that's why it doesn't look like it's all the way to the left, but this is my very last tab on my left. Anyway, if you go right below that, you'll be able to see this other panel, and this will work whether you're in dark mode or light mode. If you click anywhere within this panel, you can make breakpoints. Now, every breakpoint you put will kind of cover this line of code, so when this code executes, you will be able to stop there, step through it, which means you'll look at the values and go line by line to be able to deal damage in the code and things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. Put a breakpoint in somewhere. For me, I'm going to my move right function because that's what I want to debug. If you're looking at a bug right now, or if you have some issue in the future, just go ahead and put it wherever you think it would be. If it's an issue with damage, then probably put it where your character is taking damage. I'm going to put it in my move right, specifically when I'm moving right. You can see if value of move right is greater than 0.01, which my axis binding will say that my value is actually a 1.0 if I'm holding the right key. So there you go. So I'll put it inside here. That way it only fires once we get inside of this statement. Now, to launch Unreal Editor through Visual Studio, go to your solution configurations here and drop down. I know you can't really see it, but regardless, it's not a big deal. Just click the little drop down and select Development Editor, Debug Game Editor. It doesn't too much matter, but you do need Editor because that's what actually opens up the Unreal Editor. The other ones just launch whatever command line parameters you give it, which if you're not familiar with Visual Studio and the way it launches, or if your game doesn't have command line arguments, it can cause a few issues. So right now, I'd recommend just picking an editor, such as Debug Game or Development. It should probably be Debug Game. I usually launch in Development just because, but let's go ahead and launch in Debug Game this time. Okay, then you can hit the, make sure it's Windows 64, whatever your platform is in solution platforms. And then go ahead and hit Play Local Windows Debugger. It'll do a build real quick, so if you haven't built in a while, it might take a little bit of time. But if the build is successful, it will then open up Unreal Editor. And I built it in development last, so you'll see it's probably going to take some time to actually do that. There we go. So now it's built. and it is launching the editor. As you can see, I did not touch anything else on my computer. It's launching straight from Visual Studio. And if you go back into your Visual Studio, you can see this breakpoint is red. That's good. So it's red when you initially place it, but when you're launching and attached to a process, you want to make sure that it stays red. If it's not red, it might say it's out of date or something. You have to solve that, otherwise the breakpoint won't be hit. Okay, so now what happens is when that logic is hit, we should actually be able to break into that code and literally see what it's doing. So let's play the game. Let's pick 2 mutants again. Same case. I'll go to the refinery map this time. This map should not matter. We're in our refinery map. All I did was compile shaders, so you didn't miss anything. I just reloaded. That way it wasn't all laggy from compiling the shaders in Unreal. And you can see if I press left, then no breakpoint, nothing like that. Now, as soon as I press right, you're going to see it take away the window that's in front of us and go to the code. All I did was press the key to go right. The value was greater than 0.01, which means that we're going into this logic. Now, you can see what the values are. One of the really helpful things of stepping through the code, is to be able to see what the values are of everything and also see where the logic gets hit. So this kind of acts as like the same way a log does, where if this doesn't get stuck here, we don't hit this breakpoint, then the code didn't get executed. Also worth noting, you can see the values here without having to explicitly print them out. So if you hover over any value that's in scope, I say in scope because let's say I were to go down to a local variable in a separate function, trying to find a good one here. I honestly don't have a ton of local variables in this project. But if I go down to like this, correct sequence counter. So the check input buffer for command, this is basically determining if we perform a command, like a set of actions. So if we perform one, then we have this correct sequence counter. Well, that's all well and good. We won't be able to debug that from the function we're in because this code isn't currently being executed. Now, global variables, which honestly most of mine are, you'll be able to see them from wherever. So I can actually go to like move right controller, the function I'm not in, and look at these. Some of the variables will have crazy values like this. Like, oh, what the heck value is that? That's just something that's not really set yet. It probably got reset and hasn't changed since that point. So it's going to get calculated at the end of, you can see it gets calculated right here, float current distance apart. So you'll find it later. So don't worry if you see these crazy like e to the 15 variables. That probably just hasn't been executed yet to where it's getting set. Thus, it's some crazy value. But regardless, you can use either this locals tab down at the bottom here to see all the values that are local. Like I can actually see my base game instance as well as everything that's set in it. See both my character classes are mutant. I have some other variables in there. I can see all the variables within this class. You can see my character commands. You can see I got my fireball, rotation, player health, distance apart. You can see everything within here. Okay? So, see our character state. Say our character state wasn't setting right. Now how we can debug this is see, okay, we're in the logic here, so we can see that character state is getting set to moving right. The logic will not, or the values will not update until we're past this line. The code stops at this line before executing it. So that's worth noting because you see character state is still default here, even though it's getting set to moving right. Now, you can press F10 to step through the code. F10 will move you down to the next line. Okay. Character state, if you hover over it now, is set to moving right. We know we're working as intended there. Then you can go ahead and continue to look at everything, make sure it looks good. Now, if I were to press F10 again here, I'll skip by this line. Add input icon to screen. Okay. Great. Excellent. I'll break out. You can see current distance apart has been set now. And we're adding movement input. Okay. And then it goes into some stuff you probably won't recognize. This stuff is engine stuff and other header files that are done on Unreal side, not something you explicitly have to call. So once you start getting into this stuff, it'll eventually probably say something not loaded. You can just close those files. You probably don't need to debug them. Okay, and then when you're ready, you can continue. All right, well, great. So we were able to debug moving right. Now you can move breakpoints around in the middle of a session. So maybe I say, okay, moving right's working. Let's see if moving left is working. So I move my breakpoint. I go back into the game. Okay, so I move my character back. That way I can move to the right a little bit. But say I can move right now without triggering the breakpoint. Both of these guys can. I can jump right, all that good stuff. As soon as I move left, I'm going to trigger it again. You ready? Left. Now you can see the value is less than -0.01, and thus we're going into the moving left state. Character state, again, was default because we weren't moving prior. When we go past this line, it's going to go to moving left. Excellent. Now, there's something else we can do here. We can press F11 instead of F10 to step into a function in code. So now I'm going to show you how to step into a function. And what that means is if you're executing code and you're in there with the breakpoint, and a function gets called, if you were to press F10 normally, it would actually just surpass it. You would go to the next line, which can be what you want, but you don't always want that. So for example, I have this logic in here where I can have two characters or two players on one input device. If we do have that scenario, I have separate functions to call these functions. The way I do it really isn't that important, but basically I have these functions that the player 2 reference specifically calls, and that's how I differentiate who's on the input device. So regardless, the point is I have a function here that I know how to trigger, and I have a function within that function that I want to step into. So let me show you what I'm talking about. This one is for player 2 light attack. So my light attack for player 2 is I. When I press the I key, it calls this function, P2 keyboard attack 1. And then that calls start attack 1. Now, if I were to press 10, it would just go by it. And then it goes into the stuff, the generated body, and then it'll go into some stuff you don't know. Well, you're like, okay, maybe I want to step into the start attack function and see what logic is going on in there. So let's continue. By the way, you can hit F5 to continue as well. You don't have to hit continue. Okay. Well, now let's try it again. Let's hit I. We trigger this breakpoint. If we go over here, and let's hit F11 instead of F10, you will step into the function that you're currently over, and we can see the logic. So you can see, was light attack used is being set to true, which was previously false, and we're adding input icon to screen, which is how we get our little input stack thingy. Worth noting, this is a blueprint implementable event, as I mentioned, so this won't show up the best if I try and step into this. You can still do it, but I don't want to confuse anyone. If you step into a blueprint implementable event, you'll get this stuff, which is how the parameters are passed. It does technically debug what you need, but if you haven't debugged before, this will look very confusing. So don't get confused by this. I'm just showing you. There are some functions that aren't the best to step into. Okay, and then you can continue when you're ready and close that. But you can step into functions. You can step through functions and step into functions using that. You always hit continue at the end when you're ready, or hit F5. Let's do one more thing. So let's test with a loop. Let's find a loop somewhere that we want to use. Let's use our check input buffer for command. Now remember when I was going over the logic for this episode? If you're familiar with the tutorial series, you'll be familiar with the input buffer episodes. This is a pretty complex function where we're basically just comparing what commands we have with what commands are stored in the input buffer. So this could be complex, right? This could be something that we definitely need to debug and figure out what's going wrong because something's not quite right. Well, it's simple. To do that, put a breakpoint in your check input buffer for command. I actually just clicked on the screen, which technically counts as an input, so it's going to trigger it right away. But you can see it got triggered. Let's go through what we got. Okay, so current command is going to be one of the character commands, but we can actually step through and look at what our character commands are. So you can look at containers in this and all the data that they have. So for reference, my character commands is actually I'll open this up for you. Character commands for me is this right here. It's an array of F commands. So you can see I have these 3 variables in it. I have an array of F strings, an F string for the name, and a Boolean. So when I look at this structure, you can highlight it, open it up with the arrows, and you can see everything. Command 1, to do this, you have to type ABC. Command 2, to perform this, you have to type ABD. And command 3, Fireball, to use this, you have to type ABE. Okay, so there you go. You can look at everything, but the most important part here is the loop. Okay, so you can go through and check all these values if you want. You can see I started stepping through it, but again, we're not focusing on the specific parts of this tutorial series or this episode where we were doing input buffers, so don't worry too much about that. Just realize we can step through this as much as we want. It'll tell you exactly where the logic is going. You can see I'm on input 1. I haven't gotten any of my inputs right because a left mouse click does not match any of the buttons we need. In fact, all 3 of these, the first input we need to give it is an A. But what's useful about this? So what I can do is I can hit continue, F5, in here. Like on this for loop, a nested for loop. I can hit F5 and go to the next iteration. You can see I'm going to the next iteration because as I hit F5, you can see the command input changes. Command input and input. 0, 2. And then look, the name of the current command we're on is changing. So I can step through the iterations of the for loop by simply hitting F5. And you can see all the logic it's doing. So if there's ones I want to skip, I can do this. You can technically set conditions on breakpoints. It could be very useful. I usually just like to step through it because I like to see what the code's doing. But if you do have huge loops or things where there's just too much going on, you can't really tell what you need, the conditions are good. They're called conditional breakpoints if you want to look them up. I'll probably do another episode on them in the future. Okay, so let's stop debugging real quick. It's going to close the editor. And let's go ahead and open our editor back up. Now, I'm not going to go over any more debugging this time around. I'm just going to show you how to attach to process. That way you can go ahead and attach without closing Unreal every time you want to debug your game. So once Unreal is open, you can go into it and say, okay, I want to attach to process. So go ahead and go into Visual Studio. I still have my breakpoint here on check input buffer for command. I'm going to take that and actually switch that over to the move right function again, simply because if I have it on that other one, it'll trigger right away. I want to show you guys something. So okay, I've got this here. I have my breakpoint in move right. If I'm focused on Visual Studio, you can see my mouse is clicked on it. I can hit Control-Alt-P, which is attached to process. You can either search for your process you want or hit U. It'll pretty much always bring you to Unreal. Pretty much the only thing that is under U that looks like it's Unreal. You could see this sub-process thing, but you can just click this, the editor. Attach it. Once you attach it, the breakpoint should be set, as you see that it is. Now I can go into here, do my logic, spawn my Vanguard and my Mutant and hit continue, and then load whatever level I want. Maybe we want this level. Okay. Now when I move right, you should see that the breakpoint gets hit, and I've just attached to process. So I didn't have to launch everything through the Visual Studio window. Okay. It's worth noting, I can now continue, close this, and this is still here, and it's actually still attached. So if I am to launch again, I can, one more time, I'll put the mannequin with the mutant, we'll continue, we'll go in the training room, let's load it up. I need to build reflection captures. If I hit right, then you can see right there that it still hits the breakpoint. So there you go, guys. That's how you can debug your code, step through it multiple times, and attach your Visual Studio to your Unreal process in different methods, depending on what method you want or what's easier at the time and things like that. So I think this is just a good get your feet wet introductory debug session for Visual Studio. I know a lot of you may not have programmed before and stuff, so the debugger can be very, very useful, but also very, very scary. It definitely takes a lot of work getting used to. Even watching this video, I haven't touched a lot of topics that will help you debug, but they are for later episodes. To be honest, they're a lot more complicated than what I've shown you today, and they can get you different things like what threads, certain threads are doing. You can use this to debug multiplayer replication and things like that as well. It just depends on how you set it up. So it can be a lot of work, but it can be very useful. This is just good for initial stuff. If you see things aren't going your way, something's not working, you can't figure it out, you can debug and really get in the head of the code to see exactly what's going on. You can also use something, and this is my favorite, called the call stack to figure out exactly where a certain function call came from in case you forgot about somewhere where you called something that's giving you a headache. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If this video helped you, please subscribe. It helps me more than anything else you can do for the channel, and I just appreciate it. Lets me know that I'm doing a good job and that you guys are learning, which is the point of this tutorial series. Thank you guys so much. We just got the ability to put memberships on this channel, so you can now support the channel directly on YouTube by joining the membership. Templates, when they go up on the Epic Store, you can get them for free by joining and different things like that. So I won't go into all that right now, but I do appreciate all the support you've given us to be able to get to this point. I'm really, really, really grateful of this community and really happy and excited to see what all of you are doing. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the tutorials, and for everyone who's watching this pretty much right away, well, happy Thanksgiving. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord. Link is in the description. And lastly guys, if you want to come support us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. We'll be playing Demon's Souls on PS5 starting Wednesday, and we'll be playing some more Resident Evil 7 DLC on Friday. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you later.